The video had already been viewed 3 million times when Marcus Johnson first saw it on his phone. His hands trembled as he watched his 8-year-old twins, Zoe and Malik, cowering behind their birthday cake while a woman in a pristine white uniform screamed obscenities at his neighbors. The timestamp showed it was filmed just 20 minutes ago, right outside his front door. "You people need to learn your place," the woman shrieked on the screen. Her face twisted with rage as she pointed at the small gathering of families on the sidewalk. "This is a decent neighborhood, not some ghetto block party I'm calling ICE on every last one of you." Marcus's wife Sarah appeared beside him, her nurse's scrubs still wrinkled from her 12-hour shift at the hospital. "Oh my God, Marcus, that's Mrs. Patterson from the HOA. She's completely lost it." The twins had been so excited about their birthday party. After months of saving, Marcus and Sarah had managed to rent a small bounce house and invited the neighborhood kids for an afternoon celebration. Nothing fancy, just families gathering on their own property and the public sidewalk, sharing cake and watching children play. The kind of innocent joy that should have been protected, not persecuted. "Daddy, why is the mean lady yelling at us?" Zoe had asked earlier, her small voice barely audible over the commotion. Marcus had knelt down, trying to shield both children from the hatred spewing from Margaret Patterson's mouth. But there was no hiding from the venom in her words. Margaret Patterson had moved to Willow Creek subdivision 3 years ago, immediately positioning herself as the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards. She'd run for the HOA board with campaign flyers promising to restore property values and maintain community character. Everyone knew what that meant. Everyone except the Johnsons, who'd been too busy working double shifts to pay attention to local politics. The attack had started small. First came the notices about their lawn being a quarter-inch too high. Then, complaints about their children's bikes being visible from the street. Each violation came with increasingly hefty fines, all signed with Margaret's looping signature and official HOA letterhead. Marcus had tried reasoning with her, explaining they were following all community guidelines. But Margaret's responses grew more aggressive with each interaction. "These people think they can just move in and change everything," Margaret had told her neighbor Mrs. Chen, not knowing that Mrs. Chen's Ring doorbell was recording every word. "Property values in this neighborhood have dropped 12% since they arrived. I have documentation." The documentation, as it turned out, was a fabricated report Margaret had created using misleading statistics and cherry-picked data. She'd been circulating it among homeowners, trying to build support for what she called targeted community action. The Johnson family had become her primary target, though she'd been careful to couch her harassment in official HOA language. But today's birthday party had pushed Margaret beyond the boundaries of plausible deniability. The sight of Black and Latino families gathering together, children playing across racial lines, neighbors sharing food and laughter, it had triggered something primal in her carefully maintained facade of respectability. "This ends now," Margaret had screamed, storming across her manicured lawn with a folder full of papers. "I have noise ordinance violations, property use violations, and parking infractions. You're all trespassing on community property." Marcus had stepped forward, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "Mrs. Patterson, we're on our own property and the public sidewalk. The children are just celebrating their birthday. Don't you dare talk back to me." Margaret's voice had risen to a shriek. "I know exactly what kind of people you are. Drug dealers, gang members, welfare queens. This neighborhood was peaceful before your kind moved in." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the children had stopped playing. Sensing the dangerous shift in atmosphere, Marcus felt every eye on him, waiting to see how he'd respond to such blatant racism. His fists clenched at his sides, years of similar encounters flooding back the suspicious looks in stores, the way people clutched their purses tighter when he walked by, the constant need to prove he belonged in spaces where his presence was questioned. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your voice and step back," Marcus had said, his tone professional, despite the fury burning inside him. "We're not breaking any laws or HOA regulations. This is a children's birthday party." Margaret's response was to pull out her phone and dial 911. "Yes, I need police immediately. I'm being threatened by a group of aggressive individuals who have taken over our neighborhood. They're trespassing, creating disturbances, and I fear for my safety." The lies rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. Marcus realized this wasn't Margaret's first time weaponizing law enforcement against people she didn't want in her neighborhood. The calculation in her eyes, the way she positioned herself for maximum victim sympathy, it spoke of experience. "Are you seriously calling the police on a children's birthday party?" Sarah had stepped beside her husband, her medical training helping her remain calm under pressure. "Mrs. Patterson, this is unreasonable and frankly embarrassing." "I don't care what you think," Margaret snapped, her professional mask finally slipping completely. "You people need to learn that there are consequences for not respecting community standards. I'm having you evicted for lease violations, noise complaints, and disrupting neighborhood peace." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "We own our home. Mrs. Patterson, you can't evict homeowners." Margaret's smile was cruel. "Actually, I can. The HOA has broad powers to address community violations. I've already filed the paperwork with the county. You have 30 days to vacate the premises or face foreclosure proceedings." The words hit like physical blows. Marcus and Sarah had worked 16-hour days for 5 years to save for their down payment. This house represented everything they'd sacrificed for their children's stability. Their piece of the American dream. Their proof that hard work and determination could overcome systemic barriers. The thought of losing it to Margaret's manufactured complaints was devastating. "You can't do this," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "We've never violated anything. We pay our HOA fees. We follow all the rules." "The rules have changed," Margaret interrupted, pulling out a thick folder of documents. "New community standards went into effect last month. Retroactive enforcement begins immediately. Loud gatherings, excessive foot traffic, non-resident parking violations, you're in breach of at least 12 different covenants." Marcus scanned the papers Margaret thrust at him. The language was deliberately complex, buried in legalese that would require careful study to understand. But even at first glance, he could see the targeted nature of the new rules. Restrictions on culturally inappropriate gatherings, limits on non-traditional music and entertainment, requirements for advance approval of community events. "This is discrimination," Marcus said quietly, his legal background from his pre-medical school days helping him recognize the obvious bias. These rules specifically target cultural celebrations and community gatherings. "They're unenforceable." "Try me," Margaret snarled. "I have 3 police units en route, county enforcement backing, and a court order pending. You can fight this in court for the next 2 years while you're homeless. Or you can accept reality and find somewhere more suitable for your lifestyle." The neighbors had begun gathering. Drawn by the escalating confrontation, Marcus could see the fear in their eyes. Other families of color who understood they could be next. White allies who wanted to help but didn't know how. Elderly residents who just wanted peace. Margaret had successfully divided their community, turning neighbor against neighbor through manufactured crisis. "Mrs. Patterson, please." Mrs. Rodriguez from next door stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "The Johnson family are wonderful neighbors. Their children play with our children. This is unnecessary." Margaret whirled on her. "And you're next. Rosa, don't think I haven't noticed your extended family gatherings every Sunday. The constant Spanish music, the cooking smells, the way your relatives park on the street like they own it. One problem at a time. The mask was completely off now. Margaret's hatred wasn't limited to the Johnson family. It extended to anyone who didn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable neighbors. The gathering crowd could see her true nature, but that only seemed to embolden her further. You know what? Margaret pulled out her phone again, this time opening a different app. I'm calling ICE too. I bet half of you don't have proper documentation. Let's see how tough you are when federal agents start checking papers. The threat sent a visible shudder through the crowd. Even legal residents understood the terror of immigration enforcement. The way accusations alone could destroy lives and separate families. Margaret was weaponizing every tool of institutional power against her neighbors, confident that her whiteness and position would protect her from consequences. Stop! Zoe Johnson's voice cut through the tension, small but fierce. You're being mean to my daddy. It's my birthday, and you're ruining everything. The 8-year-old's words hung in the air, highlighting the absurdity of the situation. A grown woman was terrorizing children at their birthday party, threatening to destroy families over cake and bounce houses. Even Margaret seemed momentarily stunned by the innocence in Zoe's voice. Get back inside, baby, Marcus said softly, kneeling to his daughter's level. Daddy's going to handle this. No. Zoe stamped her foot. She's being mean to everyone. Someone needs to stop her. Margaret's laugh was harsh and bitter. Even the children are disrespectful. This is exactly what I'm talking about. No discipline, no respect for authority, no understanding of proper behavior. That was the moment Marcus knew they were past the point of reasonable discussion. Margaret wasn't interested in HOA compliance or neighborhood standards. She was using her position to punish families for existing while black, for daring to celebrate their children's milestones in spaces she considered her own. The sound of approaching sirens broke through the standoff. Margaret straightened her uniform and arranged her papers, preparing to present herself as the victim of the situation she'd created. Marcus felt the familiar dread that came with police encounters, the knowledge that his presence would be seen as inherently threatening regardless of the circumstances. Remember to stay calm, Sarah whispered to the gathered families. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Let them see the children. It was a conversation they'd had too many times with their own children. The same instructions passed down through generations of black families. How to survive encounters with law enforcement. How to make yourself small and non-threatening. How to get home safely when the system sees your existence as suspicious. 3 police cars pulled up to the curb, officers emerging with the casual alertness that suggested they'd been briefed to expect trouble. Margaret immediately approached the lead officer, a tall white man with graying temples and tired eyes. Officer Bradley, thank God you're here. Margaret's voice transformed into a quavering victim's plea. They've been increasingly aggressive all afternoon. I tried to explain the community standards, but they became hostile and threatening. Officer Bradley surveyed the scene, families with small children, a bounce house in the background, remnants of birthday cake on picnic tables. His expression suggested this wasn't what he'd expected based on the dispatch call. Ma'am, I'm not seeing any disturbance here, Bradley said carefully. Looks like a children's party to me. Margaret's face flushed. Officer, I have documented HOA violations, noise complaints, and evidence of trespassing. These people are in clear breach of community covenants. I need you to remove them from the premises immediately. Mrs. Patterson. Marcus stepped forward slowly, his hands visible and voice respectful. We're on our own property. This is my children's birthday party. We haven't broken any laws or legitimate HOA rules. Bradley looked between Marcus and Margaret, clearly trying to understand the situation. Sir, do you live here? Yes, officer. We've lived here for 3 years. This is our home. Marcus gestured toward the modest two-story house behind them. We're celebrating my twin's 8th birthday, Margaret interrupted, her voice rising again. Officer, I don't care what sob story he tells you. I have legal authority as HOA president to enforce community standards. These people are disrupting our neighborhood with their loud music, their gatherings, their complete disregard for property values. What loud music? Bradley asked, gesturing at the quiet gathering. I don't hear anything disruptive. It was loud earlier, Margaret snapped. And look at all these cars parked on the street, public parking violations, creating traffic hazards, blocking emergency access routes. Bradley counted maybe 8 vehicles parked legally along the curb, leaving plenty of space for traffic and emergency vehicles. His skepticism was becoming more apparent with each of Margaret's claims. Ma'am, I'm not seeing any violations here, Bradley said carefully. People have a right to peaceful assembly on their own property and public spaces. Margaret's fury erupted. Are you seriously taking their side? I called you for help, not to be lectured about their rights. I'm a tax-paying citizen of this community, and I demand action. The outburst revealed the entitlement driving Margaret's behavior. She'd expected law enforcement to automatically side with her, to see her whiteness and position as sufficient justification for her complaints. The fact that Officer Bradley was actually assessing the situation objectively infuriated her. Mrs. Patterson. Bradley's voice carried a warning tone. I need you to calm down. We'll investigate any legitimate complaints. But what I'm seeing here is a lawful gathering. This is unbelievable! Margaret stormed back toward her house, then turned for one final attack. Fine. If local police won't do their jobs, I'll call federal authorities. ICE will be very interested in this neighborhood's demographics. The threat sent a chill through the gathered families. Margaret was escalating beyond local harassment into federal intimidation, willing to destroy lives over her racist obsessions. Officer Bradley's expression hardened as he recognized the implications of her words. Ma'am, making false reports to federal agencies is a serious crime, Bradley warned. I strongly advise you to reconsider your statements. Margaret ignored the warning, pulling out her phone to make good on her threat. But before she could dial, a sleek black sedan pulled up behind the police cars. The door opened, and a woman in an impeccably tailored navy suit stepped out, her presence commanding immediate attention. Uncle Marcus, Aunt Sarah. The woman's voice carried across the tension as she approached the group. I got here as soon as I could. Marcus's face lit up, despite the circumstances. Vanessa. Thank God. Kids, come say hi to cousin Vanessa. Vanessa Johnson-Webb knelt to embrace Zoe and Malik, her designer suit incongruous with the birthday party setting, but her warmth genuine. Happy birthday. You too. I'm sorry this special day got interrupted. Margaret watched the exchange with growing confusion. She'd assumed the Johnson family lacked resources and connections, making them easy targets for her harassment campaign. The arrival of a clearly successful professional family member suggested she'd miscalculated. Officer Bradley. Vanessa stood and extended her hand with professional courtesy. I'm Vanessa Johnson-Webb, District Attorney for the county. I understand there's been some confusion about my family's gathering. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Officer Bradley straightened, his demeanor shifting to formal respect. Ms. District Attorney, we responded to a complaint about disturbances. But honestly, I'm not seeing any violations. Margaret stood frozen, her phone still in her hand, as the implications crashed over her. The family she'd been terrorizing was connected to the top law enforcement official in the county. Her threats about legal action, court orders, and federal investigations suddenly seemed laughably hollow. I see. Vanessa's voice remained professionally neutral, but there was steel underneath. Officer, Could you please brief me on the nature of the complaints? Bradley gestured toward Margaret, who seemed to have lost the ability to speak. The HOA president called about noise violations, trespassing, and various community standard breaches. She was also threatening to contact ICE about neighborhood residents. Vanessa's eyebrows rose slightly. ICE threats. That's concerning. Mrs. Patterson, Margaret managed to whisper. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Margaret Patterson. I'm the HOA president. Mrs. Patterson. Vanessa's tone became glacially professional. Threatening to file false reports with federal immigration enforcement is a serious federal crime. Making discriminatory complaints based on race or ethnicity violates both federal and state civil rights laws. Margaret's face went pale. I never said anything about race. This is about community standards, property values, noise ordinances. Is it? Vanessa pulled out her own phone, tapping the screen several times. Because I have audio recordings of your statements from earlier today. Would you like me to play them back? The blood drained from Margaret's face completely. She'd been so focused on intimidating the Johnson family that she'd forgotten about the numerous security cameras and recording devices throughout the neighborhood. Her racist rants had been captured from multiple angles, creating an indisputable record of her motivations. Mrs. Rodriguez. Vanessa called to the neighbor who'd tried to defend the Johnson family earlier. I believe your Ring doorbell system captured some relevant footage. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded eagerly. Everything. Ms. District Attorney. The threats, the slurs, the ICE intimidation. It's all recorded. Margaret realized her position had become untenable. The evidence of her behavior was overwhelming, and she now faced potential prosecution by one of the most powerful legal officials in the state. Her campaign of harassment had backfired spectacularly. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Margaret said desperately. I was just trying to maintain community standards. Nothing I did was illegal or discriminatory. Vanessa's smile was sharp. Let's see about that. Officer Bradley, I'd like to review those HOA documents Mrs. Patterson mentioned, the ones justifying her threats of eviction and foreclosure. Margaret's folder of papers suddenly felt heavy in her hands. She'd fabricated most of the violations and backdated new community standards to target the Johnson family specifically. Under scrutiny from the district attorney's office, her fraudulent documentation would crumble immediately. Actually, Margaret said quietly, maybe I was hasty in my assessment. Perhaps we can resolve this as neighbors. Oh, we're well past neighborhood resolution. Vanessa replied coolly. When you threatened federal immigration enforcement against lawful residents. When you used fabricated HOA documents to attempt illegal evictions. When you engaged in harassment based on racial animus, you made this a criminal matter. The gathered neighbors watched in stunned silence as Margaret's reign of terror collapsed around her. The woman who'd terrorized their community with threats and intimidation was now facing the full weight of the legal system she'd tried to weaponize against others. Officer Bradley, Vanessa continued, I'll need you to document everything Mrs. Patterson has said and done today. We'll be filing charges for harassment, fraud, civil rights violations, and attempted filing of false federal reports. Margaret dropped her folder, papers scattering across the sidewalk. You can't do this to me. I have rights. I'm a respected member of this community. You had rights, Mrs. Patterson. You chose to forfeit them when you decided to systematically harass and intimidate your neighbors. Vanessa's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with criminals who claimed victimhood when caught. The transformation was complete. Margaret Patterson, who'd strutted around the neighborhood like a feudal lord dispensing judgment, now stood deflated and desperate. facing consequences for her actions for perhaps the first time in her privileged life. But what about the HOA? What about community standards? Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. The HOA will be investigated for discriminatory practices. Vanessa replied matter-of-factly, any board members who participated in or enabled harassment will face appropriate consequences. As for community standards, they include respecting your neighbor's civil rights. Officer Bradley began collecting the scattered papers from Margaret's folder, each document potential evidence in the criminal case being built against her. The fabricated violations, the backdated policy changes, the threatening letters, all of it would be scrutinized by forensic accountants and legal experts. Mrs. Patterson, Bradley said formally, I need you to come with me for questioning. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda rights were read, Margaret's eyes darted around the crowd of neighbors she'd spent months tormenting. There was no sympathy in their faces, no support from the community she'd claimed to protect. Her isolation was complete and self-inflicted. This isn't over, Margaret called out as she was led toward the police car. I'll fight this. I'll expose what you people really are. Vanessa watched calmly as the woman who'd terrorized her family was placed in the back of a police cruiser. Actually, Mrs. Patterson, this is over. You just haven't realized it yet. As the police cars pulled away, the neighborhood fell into stunned silence. The children, who'd been hiding during the confrontation, slowly emerged from behind their parents. The birthday party equipment still sat in the Johnsons' yard, a reminder of how a simple celebration had transformed into a moment of reckoning. Cousin Vanessa, Zoe approached tentatively. Are we in trouble? Vanessa knelt down, her professional mask softening as she addressed her young cousin. No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. The mean lady was breaking the law, and now she has to face consequences. Will she come back? Malik asked, still clutching his birthday balloon. No, buddy, she won't be bothering anyone in this neighborhood anymore. Vanessa's voice carried absolute certainty. Now, I believe someone promised me birthday cake. The simple question broke the tension, reminding everyone why they'd gathered in the first place. Slowly, the party atmosphere began to return. Neighbors who'd been cowering in fear started approaching the Johnson family with apologies and support. Marcus, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Mrs. Chen said, tears in her eyes. We should have stood up to her sooner. We were just afraid. Fear is understandable, Sarah replied graciously. What matters is that we support each other now. Over the next few hours, as the birthday party resumed and neighbors shared stories of their own encounters with Margaret's harassment, the true scope of her campaign became clear. She'd systematically targeted every family of color in the subdivision, using official HOA channels to legitimize her discriminatory agenda. She sent us a notice about culturally inappropriate landscaping, Mr. Patel revealed. Said our prayer flags were violations of community aesthetics. We got fined for excessive pedestrian traffic because my grandmother walks in the evenings. Mrs. Kim added. $300 for an elderly woman taking walks. Each story added another layer to Margaret's pattern of harassment. She'd weaponized the HOA against anyone who didn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable neighbors, confident that her position would protect her from accountability. We're going to fix this, Vanessa announced to the gathered crowd. Not just Margaret's prosecution, but the systemic issues that allowed her to abuse her position for so long. The promise carried weight, coming from the district attorney. Vanessa had the legal authority and political influence to implement real change, to ensure that Margaret's victims received justice and that future harassment campaigns would be prevented. As the sun began to set, the birthday party evolved into something larger, a community celebration of resilience and solidarity. Families who'd been living in fear for months finally felt safe to be themselves, to celebrate their cultures and traditions without fear of retaliation. Next year, we should make this an annual block party, Mrs. Rodriguez suggested. A real celebration of our diversity. I love that idea, Sarah replied. Watching her children play with friends from across the cultural spectrum of their neighborhood, show everyone what community really looks like. 3 weeks later, Margaret Patterson stood in county court facing multiple felony charges. The woman who'd terrorized an entire neighborhood now appeared small and defeated, her legal team struggling to mount any defense against the overwhelming evidence of her crimes. The video footage, audio recordings, and fabricated documents painted a clear picture of systematic harassment and fraud. Margaret's claims of community protection crumbled under scrutiny, revealing them as transparent cover for racial animus and abuse of power. The defendant exploited her position of trust within the homeowners association to systematically harass and intimidate residents based on their race and ethnicity. Vanessa stated during the hearing, "This represents a clear violation of federal civil rights laws and state harassment statutes." Margaret's attorney attempted to portray her as an overzealous community volunteer whose actions had been misinterpreted. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the pattern too clear. The judge rejected every excuse and deflection. "Mrs. Patterson, your actions represent a systematic campaign of harassment that violated the basic civil rights of your neighbors," Judge Williams stated firmly. "The court finds you guilty on all counts." The sentence was swift and comprehensive. 3 years in prison, substantial fines, restitution to all victims, and a permanent ban from holding any position in homeowners associations. Margaret's reign of terror was officially over. But the real change came in the weeks and months that followed. The HOA was investigated and restructured. With new leadership elected from the diverse community Margaret had tried to suppress, discriminatory policies were eliminated, and robust anti-harassment protections were implemented. This case became a catalyst for examining how HOAs can be weaponized against minority residents. Vanessa explained to reporters after the sentencing, "We're implementing countywide reforms to prevent similar abuses of power." The story gained national attention, becoming a symbol of how institutional racism operates through seemingly neutral community organizations. The Johnson family found themselves reluctant celebrities, using their platform to advocate for broader reforms. 6 months after that chaotic birthday party, Willow Creek subdivision looked very different. The community garden project that Margaret had blocked was thriving. Cultural celebrations happened regularly, without fear of harassment. Property values had actually increased as the neighborhood became known for its inclusive, welcoming atmosphere. "Look at this place now," Marcus said to Sarah, as they watched their children play with friends in the park that had been built where Margaret's house once stood. She'd been forced to sell it to pay legal fees and restitution, and the community had purchased it for green space. "It's what it always could have been if people like her hadn't gotten in the way," Sarah replied. "Just neighbors being neighbors." The twins, now 9 years old, had no memory of fear in their neighborhood. They grew up surrounded by families from dozens of different backgrounds, languages, and traditions, exactly the kind of diversity that had terrified Margaret but enriched everyone else's lives. "Remember when that mean lady tried to stop our birthday party?" Zoe asked one day while helping in the community garden. "I remember you being very brave that day," Marcus replied, pride evident in his voice. "You stood up for what was right even when you were scared." "Cousin Vanessa taught us that standing up to bullies is important," Malik added, carefully watering the tomato plants they'd grown from seeds donated by the Kim family. The lesson had spread throughout the community. When challenges arose, neighbors now approached them together, with mutual support rather than suspicion. The toxic atmosphere Margaret had created had been replaced by genuine community spirit. On the first anniversary of what became known as the Birthday Party Incident, Willow Creek held its inaugural Diversity Day celebration. Families shared food, music, and traditions from around the world. The event drew visitors from across the county, making it clear that inclusion was not just morally right, but economically beneficial. "You know what the best part is?" Sarah asked Marcus, as they watched hundreds of families enjoying the festival. "The kids growing up here will never think this is unusual. To them, this is just how communities are supposed to work." Margaret Patterson remained in prison, her appeals exhausted and her reputation permanently destroyed. Occasionally, news reports would mention her case as an example of how not to use community leadership positions. But in Willow Creek, she'd become largely forgotten, a brief, dark chapter in the neighborhood's history. "Do you ever think about her?" Marcus asked Vanessa during one of their regular family dinners. "Sometimes," Vanessa admitted. "Mostly I think about how many Margaret Pattersons are out there in other communities, terrorizing other families. That's why this case mattered so much. It sent a message that there are consequences for weaponizing institutional power against minorities." The reforms implemented after Margaret's conviction had indeed spread beyond their county. HOAs across the state adopted new transparency requirements and anti-discrimination protections. Legal aid organizations used the case precedent to challenge similar harassment campaigns in other communities. She probably never imagined that trying to ruin a children's birthday party would lead to nationwide policy changes. Sarah observed with a mixture of irony and satisfaction. "That's the thing about bullies," Vanessa replied. "They always underestimate the people they're trying to intimidate. Margaret saw your family as powerless victims. She never bothered to learn who you really were or what resources you had." As the years passed, the story of Margaret Patterson's downfall became part of Willow Creek's community folklore, told to new residents as an example of what the neighborhood had overcome. But the real legacy wasn't the dramatic confrontation or legal victory. It was the sustained commitment to inclusion and mutual respect that had grown from that painful experience. The Johnson twins grew up to become community leaders themselves, carrying forward the lessons they'd learned about standing up to injustice. They never forgot that single afternoon when hate had tried to destroy their birthday party, and love had fought back to create something beautiful. On quiet evenings, when Marcus and Sarah sat on their front porch, watching the neighborhood children play together, regardless of their family's background or heritage, they felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this place of peace. Margaret Patterson's hatred had inadvertently created the very thing she'd tried to prevent: a truly integrated community where diversity was celebrated rather than feared. The block party that had started as a simple birthday celebration and been transformed into a battlefield for civil rights had ultimately become the foundation for something much larger: proof that when communities come together to reject hate and embrace their shared humanity, justice doesn't just prevail, it transforms everything it touches. Years later, when people asked what had made the difference in bringing Margaret Patterson to justice, the answer was always the same: a community that refused to be divided, a family that stood strong in the face of hatred, and the simple truth that love, when defended with courage and backed by the law, will always triumph over the forces that seek to tear us apart. In the end, Margaret Patterson's legacy was not the fear she'd tried to instill, but the unity she'd accidentally created in her desperate attempts to divide. The birthday party she'd tried to destroy had become an annual celebration of everything she'd hated most and everything that made their community truly great.